Well, this time next week, there will be fireworks in the sky and barbecues in backyards. It's the 4th of July, but my next guest wants to remind you that this holiday is more than just parades and parties. In fact, he hopes you'll make this year's Independence Day more meaningful by reflecting on its origins and its importance. Host of KSL Radio's Inside Sources, Boyd Matheson, joining me with what we forget about the 4th. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
And I'm really looking forward to your insights on this topic, Boyd. I know it hits a passion point for you, strikes at one of your heart cores. But I also find myself thinking we annually talk about things. We haven't talked about this, you and me, so I'm excited. There's a quote that sets up this topic really well. I'm going to quote a wise friend of mine.
Who could that be?
Are you ready? Are you ready? A wise friend of mine once said, "What we ignore or forget, our children may never know, and what our children do not know, our grandchildren will not possess." I'm not here to use your words against you, but I think that sets up this topic so well of understanding what's underneath all of this fun that's about to happen.
Yeah, so we put that in the hashtag Stuff Boyd Says categories.
Good.
Where that goes.
It's a good hashtag.
But it's an important thing to recognize that if we just ignore it, we forget it. It doesn't just pass through the bloodstream.
Yeah.
These are things that these are crucial conversations we have to have with our kids and with our grandkids, because it's so easy. I mean, have your barbecue, awesome, fireworks, do the drill, go to a pool party, do it all.
Of course.
And make sure you at least stop for a moment and talk about what it is that allows us to do all of those things.
It seems there are people that this topic of patriotism, it strikes them a little more deeply or resoundingly, and I find myself leaning into their words. Like I was already seeing some posts on Instagram, and you find yourself swept up in that, and that's a good thing. We should be caught up in that patriotic feeling this time of year. We should feel that.
That's right, and it's those principles that really drive it. When you look back to the founding of the country, it was principle-driven, and we often talk about the founders as great, wise, and noble souls, which they were, of course, but they were also entrepreneurs and business owners and wanted to raise families and wanted to have their own, version of opportunity and upward mobility, which are all the things that we should be hoping for today. And it all comes back to community as well.
Yes, let's reflect and honor some of those principles. You have three things we often forget but should remember about the 4th of July. First, community and culture lead.
Yeah, it's so important. Again, we look back to the founding, and we look at even the Declaration of Independence that we celebrate on the 4th of July. And it's an important document, but it wasn't a leading document. Community and culture lead, politicians follow. So back to the beginning, the Revolutionary War had been going for almost 18 months before the politicians got around to putting it on paper. Now, important galvanizing document, but it wasn't a leading document. And most of the great moments in our nation's history were not led by politicians. And whether it was those early battles of the Revolutionary War, it was grabbing 70 guys out of a church to defend the community. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1947. It took Congress another 17 years to get around to real meaningful civil rights legislation. Those things happen over and over and over again. Our politicians sometimes try to convince us that they're leading, but it's community and culture that really lead. And so it's what we do in our homes, it's what we do in our neighborhoods that actually matters the most.
Which we continually hear you remind us of on your radio show, and I know you believe that, but that's esteeming, right? Like what's happening around my kitchen table is important. Those conversations I'll have with my kids, my grandkids, those matter. Yeah,
they absolutely matter, and it's so important that we recognize those. In fact, we've been thinking this week, we always talk about the United States as a melting pot, and that's just a big mush of stuff, and that's not it. It's more like a salad bowl where everybody brings their own uniqueness, and it's even more than that. It's a potluck dinner. If you're inviting people to a potluck dinner, you don't say, well, come, but don't bring anything. Everybody's valued. Everybody has something to contribute.
I love that.
And as we start to look at it as a potluck, everything changes.
Less of a melting pot, more of a potluck. I love that so much. Another principle we can honor this time of year, true happiness is found in service.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that Thomas Jefferson went through this thing that we love to quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And often, at least my kids did, they'd use that pursuit of happiness to justify some narcissistic activity, right?
They're wise.
They're wise, yeah. But Jefferson inserted that very specifically, and happiness had a very different meaning. It was based on discipline, virtue, and service. Now, there's no one in Hollywood, there's no one on social media who's saying, if you want to be happy, discipline, service, and virtue. And so we have to really recognize what the words have meaning, and the meaning matters. And when we take time to step back and actually learn what it is, we can all realize if you really want to be happy, Jefferson, all the founders knew the best way to be happy was if you were helping your neighbor.
Well, I don't want to follow your teenager's footsteps in that regard and turn this into a narcissistic pursuit, but the tagline on this show is live happy. And I think a lot of times people think that lands frivolously or lightly, but there was deep purpose and meaning behind that word happy. It does take work and effort, and as you described, discipline and service to really feel the joy that we're after in this life.
Absolutely. It's so much more. And sometimes we do think it's, doing what feels good to me. It's not that. And your version of happy and the conversations you have on this show every day are about adding depth and dimension to our lives and then sharing it with the people that matter.
I hope so. Thanks for that, Boyd. A final point we'll end on. It's an important one. All men are created equal.
Yeah, so interesting. The whole Constitution of the Declaration of Independence, if you go through it line by line, most of it is a list of grievances. All the bad, awful, horrible, terrible things that King George and company were doing. And then smack dab in the middle of all of that, you have this incredible phrase that all men are created equal. That was not an accident that Jefferson inserted that in there, and it really began a crucial conversation for the nation that we're still trying to align our behavior with that principle, again, going back to principle. And it's been a long and uneven march towards that all men and women are created equal, but it was in there for a reason. And that's the challenge to all of us, is to make sure that we're not just tolerating one another. That's not enough. If you said, how's your marriage? Well, we tolerate each other, and there is some mutual toleration probably required, but we really need to love each other. We really need to connect with each other. And as we look at that, I often ask the question, when was the last time you had lunch or went out and got a soda or just hung out with someone who looks different, thinks different, lives different, behaves different than you, and getting that perspective? And I think that's what Jefferson was saying. Look, all men are created equal. All these grievances are there, but there's something even more important in that document, and we're still striving as a nation, even on a 4th of July, to align our principles and our behavior so they actually match, because that's what will empower the country to actually move forward.
But it's a worthy effort to continue on toward, and these are worthy conversations. Just to underscore what we've perhaps already touched on, but Boyd, why are these conversations so important ultimately for parents, for grandparents to sit down around the table, around the barbecue, whatever it is, and to throw out these themes? Why does that matter?
Yeah, because it helps our young people understand that for all the challenges and difficulties we have in our country, it's still the most amazing place on earth. And you can travel anywhere in the world, and people will talk about what's possible in America. Going back to Jackie Robinson, I listened to him years after he had broken that color barrier in Major League Baseball. He faced all kinds of opposition, and he said, but I knew I had a chance because my fight was in the United States of America. And for our young people to understand, regardless of what obstacles they're facing, what difficulties they're facing, there's a chance because they live in this amazing place called America. I always like to call it what happens within the parentheses of a crazy idea. And most of the great moments in our nation's history really have been pretty crazy. Woman on a bus, a man with the dream, putting a man on the moon, small steps and giant leaps, all of those happen within that parentheses of a crazy idea. And if we don't have those conversations with our kids, we'll start doing the status quo, minimum standard, and that's the beginning of the end, whether it's an individual, whether it's a career, whether it's a relationship, or whether it's a nation. We have to keep striving and living in that parentheses.
Amen, sir. Your words are so good. Thank you so much. You can hear more of his words and sentiments like this on your radio show, 1 to 3, Inside Sources on KSL News Radio. Happy 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.